When talking about action research, we're talking more teacher-based research. So with action research, you'll have a local setting, which is probably going to be a teacher's classroom or your own classroom. It is, like I said, usually teachers, but it could also be principals or even much broader with an entire school or an entire school district. You don't have the researchers or scholars who are really kind of getting involved as they do with the larger research projects that we've been reading throughout the semester. With action research, there's a very brief literature review to understand what the interventions might be about or what the research is saying about a certain topic, but you certainly don't do a complete comprehensive overview of the research like we see with the studies that we've been looking at throughout the semester. With action research, we have teacher-developed measures, so that may be a survey or formative assessment or just some sort of summative assessment where you're looking at a quiz at the end of the quarter or the end of the lesson. The sample that's going to be used for action research is going to be your classroom. So again, you're focusing on the group of students you're working with as opposed to picking a randomized sample or getting a representation of the population through a very specific sample within a district or state or across the nation. The results for action research are just used for that classroom or that school or that district. The reason that the research is done is to better the instruction and to make improvements. That's different than the traditional research that we've been looking at, which really has a lot more focus to kind of contributing to the field and is often used for publications and presentations. So action research may be more relevant for you as a teacher if that is something that you're doing in your classroom as opposed to traditional research, which you may only consult if you're looking to understand different strategies. So you would go to practitioner journals to get that information. With action research, you're going to be doing the research with the intent to inform and change your own practice in the future. It's again done in the context of your own environment, and teachers and principals work together to identify problems, or maybe just the teacher or just the principal, and then they can work collaboratively to figure out what's going on within a classroom or a school. So in the state of Virginia recently, there was a study that identified students in special education and determined whether or not those needs were being met. So they really went in and kind of dug into each of the schools and classrooms, and they found that in some cases the needs were being met, but in others they weren't. So they continued their work to really discover why that was happening within Virginia, and so that they could make improvements on the services these students were receiving. When thinking about what action research is not, don't think about action research as being kind of a project or a research project where you're looking for the literature. So the information that you're doing now when you're looking for literature on a specific topic is not about action research, but it could set the stage. Action research is also not problem solving about trying to figure out everything that's wrong, but it's a way to figure out how we can change our instruction to impact students. So we're looking for answers. We're searching for ways that we can do things better through action research. In action research, teachers begin with a cycle of posing questions. Then they begin gathering data, reflecting on that data or the literature that they're finding. Then you go into deciding kind of the course of action based on that reflection. So you need to figure out what is the problem, how do I collect the data, how do I organize it, how do I interpret it, and then what do I do with it? And again, that reflection process starts all over again. So it's constantly a work in progress where you're reanalyzing and re-examining what's happening in a classroom or a school or a district to better understand and then fix and improve the instructional quality for students. When conducting action research, it's really important to do some really careful planning from the beginning, because then it kind of eliminates those false starts and the frustration that can occur when you pick a topic that you haven't really thought through. So when thinking about action research, it should have to do with some aspect of teaching or learning. It should most definitely be something you can control. There's really no point in doing research or trying to improve something that you have no control over. So make sure that it is something that you have power over, and also make sure it's something that you're really passionate about and you're motivated to want to change. Otherwise, you're going to kind of get started and then maybe fizzle out because you just don't have that motivation or interest in what you've decided to look at with your action research. When developing an action research question, you want to make sure again that you're asking something that you have an influence over. And you should not be able to answer your question just by reading the literature. So if you're asking something about, how do we teach students to read, well, there's certainly literature out there about that. But you want to figure out exactly what it means for your own students as well. So for example, if I were to say, if I set up class meeting times for students to describe their learning experiences, in what ways will the information about their learning processes lead to changes in my teaching? Or how can teaching a hands-on unit on crayfish help my third grade students develop an understanding of animal adaptations? So again, just those types of questions, making sure that it's in common language, you're not using a lot of jargon, it's concise, it's meaningful, and it's really just kind of direct is the most important piece as well. When you get into the gathering of data, these are some of the different sources of data collection. You want to make sure that you're selecting data that's most appropriate for the issue that you're researching. You need to consider whether the data is easy to collect, if there are sources that are readily available for you to use, what are the least amount of data that you can use to get the data for action. So in other words, what's the least amount of sources, if you will, to be able to actually make change. And then you have to kind of organize it in a way that you are that makes it useful to identify trends and themes for yourself. You need to think about triangulation. Are you going to make an effort to triangulate the data, which you really should do, so that you know that your results are as reliable and valid as possible? And typically, you would probably have both quantitative and qualitative information. So that's another component to kind of consider. How are you balance that out, and what types of quantitative or qualitative data do you want to look at in order to answer the question that you're trying to solve? At this point, much of what I'm saying should look familiar to you, since it's very similar to what we've seen in the research all along during the semester. But with action research, you do go into interpretation. You analyze and identify the themes within your data, and that could be the classroom data, it could be individual students, or it could be subgroups of students within your classroom. Once you've interpreted what you're seeing with the data, then you're going to actually act on it. So you're going to design some sort of plan or intervention that's going to address what you found in your data. So if your students are not showing that they understand animal habitats, you may come up with some intervention or strategy to help teach them about habitats. And so what you'll do is you'll actually instruct them with this new intervention, and then go back and evaluate the results. Was it effective? Did your data show evidence that this intervention that you're trying actually worked? So it's kind of a trial and error, and you just kind of go back and forth with figuring out if the changes you're making in instruction are making a difference in your classroom. It's really important to make sure that you're only focusing on one variable at a time. So if you're teaching about habitats, you may change your intervention for habitats, but at the same time, don't throw in adaptations as well in a new intervention with adaptations. Just do one variable at a time. This just gives you an overview of the different types of action research, and as you move down the pyramid from the classroom to the district, the research becomes much more complex, and it's going to utilize far more resources, of course, because you're dealing with so many more students and the picture gets just so big. as you move away from the classroom to a larger group of students. The issues could be organizational, it could be community-based, performance-based, or it could be just part of the processes for making decisions. I won't read through all the benefits of action research. I'll let you do that yourself. But action research is really something that teachers engage on a very regular basis, whether they call it action research or not. And it really is imperative to becoming a good teacher and to making sound decisions about your instruction in your classroom. This breaks down what happens in a classroom with action research when you have the teacher and the students kind of working simultaneously during an action research project. You have the teacher who is observing student activity, assessing their performance, and then giving them feedback while the students are acquiring the knowledge and they're processing and then they're performing. So these things are all happening together, just like that you would expect during any lesson or any instruction in a classroom. There's an engagement between both the teacher and the students, and both have a very active role in this process.